something that it's right up my alley of like just where'd you come from, that kind of like, you know,
Yeah.
where'd you get married, whatever, but more of a family. But this has a common denominator, which is Coldwater.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
my first question is, well, if you would state your name
John Walsh,
and
Betty Walsh.
what year did you become members?
1969
Sorry.
in July.
Sorry, I'm gonna ask a question, and if you would do me a favor, repeat my question in your answer. So, because we'll never hear
Oh,
my
okay.
voice. So if I say what year, then you say we became members or whatever.
Gotcha.
Okay, we'll try that again.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have told you that.
That's all right.
What year did you guys become members?
We became members in July of 1969.
And how did you hear about Coldwater?
Good friend of ours at work, which was Union Electric,
Okay.
was Pat Harrington. And Pat invited us down, and Pat and I played tennis together in St. Louis. And he invited us down so that we could play tennis. And this was probably in 1968, sometime in there. And
Now, I got to come because he was his tennis partner.
so tennis really, Pat Harrington and tennis really brought us to Coldwater.
Was the tennis court the same tennis? Was it in the same spot?
Yes, the tennis court was in the same spot, and that's an interesting tennis court because it was built by hand by the members of the club, probably back in maybe the 40s, early 50s as a dirt court, and then they blacktopped it, and so it was built by hand by club members, and that was before my time. But
Was it always one?
one court, one court, and
Because I remember as a kid, we would have sometimes like a function, like a holiday, like there would be like a party, or I remember lights, and we'd have a party out there
occasionally they used to do that, yeah. But
instead of in here, I guess.
right, well, yeah, to be different, right.
So, so you heard, when you first became members, children, was it new? You became members because of Pat Harrington. Did you build the cabin or did you buy the cabin?
Now when we came down, Pat said, well, there are 3 cabins for sale. You might be interested in buying one of them. So we picked one out. It was the Chapman cabin. And we bought, and it's interestingly enough, we bought also at the same time, Dave Jones bought his cabin. I think maybe even the same month in 1969. So we picked out the Chapman cabin, and that's the one we bought. And
Was the Chapman's original to that cabin?
the Chapmans were not original to this cabin. There were at least 2 other people that had the cabin before Chapman. Chapman was from Webster, and he was an insurance man in Webster, so Pat Harrington knew him. And so we made a deal with I think it was Bob Chapman, and he had the cabin probably a few years, but there had been 2 other owners. Of course, the cabin was built in 1929, so cabin was already 40 years.
So it's one of the originals.
40. Oh, it was. Yes, definitely one of the original. It was already 40 years old when we bought it.
Growing up here, you know, during the summers, it seemed like the original cabins, the kitchen was separate, or maybe like it wasn't as a full-blown kitchen. Was yours? Did you modify your cabin at any point, or did the Chapmans?
We did not do really anything to our cabin, but what had been done prior to ours was indoor plumbing had been put in. I think probably when electricity came to Coldwater, which was maybe in the late 40s, early 50s. You'd have to check on those dates, but They had only an outhouse, and but they did have a kitchen, and I guess the well was, I assume maybe a hand pump well at the time, probably.
Well, yeah, if they didn't have electricity, there was.
Exactly. So I assume they had water somehow.
So, in your cabin, kids, cram them all in, everybody sleeping on the floor?
Our
How did
our cabin was pretty nice because it had been people. I don't know whether it was it was probably the people even before Chapman had kind of built the inside with 2 bedrooms and then an upstairs. And we have an upstairs in our cabin that has 4 double beds and a single bed in an upstairs. So, and that's all there is upstairs is 4 double beds and a single bed. So that you could get a lot of people sleeping everywhere. And we've had as many people as filling all that up with kids in a tent outside, so.
Yeah, the smaller the bodies, you can put more.
Yeah, right. And
the front
I think we had some on the front porch even, sleeping in sleeping bags, so.
And only one bathroom,
And only one bathroom,
because
yes.
the outhouse had been torn down by then.
And one bathroom is fine, y'all share.
Still do.
Bill, you know? Take turns. So, did you do holidays down here? How did you, because I've heard like, people would like, it's the first day of summer, they were down here until the last day of
Yeah.
summer.
We used the cabin almost strictly as a weekend getaway. And starting really when we could turn the water on, which would be in April. And starting on weekends, while we would come down just for the weekend. We would seldom come down for any longer than a weekend, but we would come down most weekends.
So you're from St. Louis?
And we lived in Kirkwood, and so
Where in Kirkwood?
we lived in Huntley Hills, which was behind Snooks Bettendorf,
Okay.
which is now the Toyota dealer, I think.
Right.
I think it's something else now. They corner changes
Yeah, right.
a lot.
But that's where we lived at the time. So
So it was,
Then we moved to Briar Hill Farm in Kirkwood.
so back then, describe versus now. Describe the car trip from
yeah.
Manchester and Kirkwood Road to here versus now.
Well, getting here was a little different. One thing, I was working, so almost every weekend what would happen was Betty would pick me up down at Union Electric down at 18th and Shoto on Friday night after work with the kids in the back and loaded with whatever for the weekend. And we would drive down on Friday night. Interstate 55 was completed, I think, only to Peevely when we first started down. So you had to come down from there on Highway 61 to Zell, and you cut it across Zell over to Highway B.
Where is
So-
Zell now?
Zell is where you get on and off the interstate.
Highway 32?
Yes, 32 and 55 is Zell, roughly. So, yeah, and we would come down, and of course the first thing we'd want to do, and almost before we unloaded the car, was jump in the swimming pool. And the kids were only 4 and 8 maybe when we first
7.
bought the cabin. So they were
Two.
2 kids, yeah, a boy and a girl. And so we would, that would be how we'd get down and how the weekend would start, basically. And we would do that almost every weekend. And it became our weekend retreat. Now, when the kids got older, they would have things that would have to be done on weekends. So it
Social.
changed a little bit the older the kids got.
Yeah.
But
So you mentioned the pool. it has to have changed over the years. So my friends think I'm crazy when I say that that's the pool. Because one time they were like, I told them to, once you get to the pool, the next street, turn left. Well, they just kept driving because they were waiting for a pool.
Pool, oh, yes, right, yeah, not a lake or something, right.
So what did the pool look like back in '69?
Well, the pool looked just like it does now, except the tower had a diving board. And there was not as much concrete there to sit on as there is now.
Was there any little thing that went across?
Eventually, Perry's Ferry, I guess now you'd call it a zip line. Perry put a line across the pool from a big tree. It was a big sycamore tree that was there by where now the place where we eat there at the pool used to be a big sycamore, and that was the zip line.
Why was it called Perry's Ferry?
Because Perry Fairfax is the one that put it up.
Who is he?
Perry Fairfax owned the Shook-Eye cabin before the Shook-Eyes.
And how long did the zip line last? Because I remember as a child being very upset when it was
Gone, yeah. I don't know how many years the zip line lasts, but I would say quite a few. Maybe as long as that tree.
Oh, that's right.
I think that tree went, and that was the zip line. Well,
Okay. Do you remember how many caretakers back? Do you remember?
that's interesting. The number of caretakers that we've had, that's an interesting question because I can't remember the first one. He was really good. You could look in the list and see by years which one, who he was.
Do you remember anything
I don't
about
remember names.
any of them? I remember
Sure.
that guy Pat.
Oh yeah, Pat Stanford.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's when my memory started coming up.
I hired Pat Stanford. I was president of the club at the time, but that was in the 80s. Yeah, he had a beard, and he was a perfect guy. But the guy that was the caretaker when we started, the club was, caretaker-wise, was a little different. The caretaker would fix meals almost at the drop of a hat, and it seemed like, I think every Saturday night she would have fried chicken dinner, and rather than eating just holiday weekends, why she would. But I think that went away pretty quick after that particular caretaker. Another thing I remember about that caretaker was he taught me how to skin a squirrel. He was a squirrel hunter, and I was interested in squirrel hunting, and so he taught me how to skin a squirrel, and Betty learned how to cook a squirrel.
God love you. As long as no one had to learn how to eat a squirrel.
Oh,
Kill it, cook it.
good. Oh, it's just like chicken, so.
So, did you spend time at the rifle range? Are you this is originally a hunting, gather, Coldwater Outgame Preserve. Are you that type of?
My activities mostly were centered around tennis, and the family got into tennis, and I did, like I say, I did some hunting with squirrel hunting. I never did deer hunting or turkey hunting, and but I enjoyed shooting a gun and made sure the family could shoot. So we enjoyed the rifle range, but it was not one of our priority things. It was tennis and the swimming pool were the main deal.
Any shuffleboard?
Never played shuffleboard, and we did fishing. And interesting thing, when we first bought the cabin, my dad had always wanted to build a car, so he built a go-kart. And so we had one of the first go-karts that was down here, and my dad built it and gave it basically to my son. So my son and I would drive it all over the place, and we would drive it down the creek and fish for smallmouth in the creek. And I can remember bringing back smallmouth, holding them up as we were driving the go-kart back.
Could you fit 2 people in the go-kart?
2 people.
So,
2 people
Two of
go-kart.
them.
right.
Yeah.
I drove it by myself sometimes.
Yeah.
It fit.
So it was the go-kart was the activity for the kids early on, you know. They loved it.
And it's transformed craziness of what is now in all the, I mean, no one walks anywhere.
Right. Well, we transformed from go-kart to trail bike.
What's a trail bike?
It's like a mini bike, motorized 2-wheel. They were Honda trail bikes, which were pretty popular. And we had 2 of them, and we would ride all over the place. I can remember we would get on them and take a trip, go on the fire trail and go all the way down to Highway T and to Wamak, and stop at there's a store at Wamak where you could get soda and candy and stuff, and then ride Highway T to back to WW and back into here. So we would make a big round trip with our little trail bikes. Yeah.
So what other activities? Like you guys would come down here, the kids, and you know, you'd let them go, right?
Pretty much.
Like, it isn't like it is now. And you know, I only know from my childhood, but I mean, what did occupy their day?
Well, riding the go-kart around was a big thing, but I think probably in addition to swimming, of course, but they knew how to swim early. But the creek, our cabin is across from Alexander Creek, which is the smaller of the 2 creeks, and they would go over to Alexander Creek and catch crawdads and do all that sort of thing. I remember one weekend, son had a buddy with him, and they were in Cub Scouts, and they had caught some crawdads, and they went up on the hill above our cabin and above Alexander Creek and cooked the crawdads. That was their camp out. There was their thing to be.
For a badge.
Yeah, to be good scouts.
What are your children's names, and how do they still connect? Your daughter,
Our daughter, Carol Lee, is the member now. And so she's the younger of the 2. But Glenn was always, he loved it down here. She always loved it down here. And this was a big part of their lives. And so we were glad we got it as early as we did. And they just grew up with it. And now they still like to come down. And Carol Lee's the member. And
Her name is Carol Lee Clark now. And son Glenn, his real name is John Glenn Walsh Jr. So he was named after me.
now that makes sense because I was at the Roush's and you're having dinner with someone and that's also a tennis person from Union Electric, maybe there's
Yes.
a connection to Jones. Harrington was Jones also, did you say?
Jones was a tennis
Tennis
person.
thing?
Tennis was really big I don't know whether you remember, but tennis was really big in the 70s and 80s. It was a big sport. A lot of people were playing tennis, and the tennis court would be busy all day long on a weekend.
I do remember that.
And so there were a lot of tennis players here.